is an award AP winning NFL and college football writer, a member of the Pro Football Writers Association, formerly of NFL.com, Sports Illustrated, SB Nation, and now the publisher of The Leap for the famous Green Bay Packers. Of course, the newsletter over on Substack. Make sure you check him out. Also making his All Access Football debut. It's Jason B. Hirschhorn here on the All Access Football Daily Show. Good morning, Jason.
Good morning, Rick. How's it going?
Good, man. Thanks for joining us here. And I know it's the bye week. We dragged you guys out of the bye week and onto the show, and we appreciate it, giving us an inside perspective with the Green Bay Packers. Of course, you do a wonderful job with the Leap, fellow Substack newsletter, by the way, as is All Access Football. So let's get into it, because the Packers, to me, it's been a tale of two teams through the first two games. The last two games, it looked like legitimate Super Bowl contenders out of the gate. The last 2 weeks, not so much. Who are, and they've had some injuries, but who are the real Green Bay Packers?
I understand why the question is set up as this is a story of two different teams. I think it's actually really been the same team with just some edge case situations they propped up over the last two games. You look at weeks 1 and 2, they beat one of the best teams in the NFL in the Detroit Lions and did so in a dominating fashion. The following week, or really just a few days later, that was the Thursday night game, they beat a playoff team from a year ago, and again did so in a fashion where they had control of the game the entire time, and they looked like a really dominant squad. Then they did lose in week 3 against the Browns, but if you watch that game, it wasn't until they threw that really unforced interception that the game ever really appeared as though it was, in the balance for Green Bay. And then this past week against the Dallas Cowboys, there were the injuries. I know you mentioned them at the top, but also they were dealing with injuries in the game. It wasn't just those offensive line injuries they entered the game with. It wasn't just, the wide receiver injuries that they had, again, entering the game. It was, they lose their at least most athletic, most talented defensive tackle in the middle of the game to a knee injury. And then at a certain point, with all the snaps that were played, this game went into and all the way through overtime, they just kind of ran out of bodies along the defensive front. So that's why you see things like 40 points given up in one game when they'd only given up 41 points the previous 3 weeks combined. So to a certain degree, I don't actually think that this is really a tale of two teams. I think it's one team that has run itself into a few weird situations over the last 2 weeks. If you thought that they were a Super Bowl contender after weeks 1 and 2, I don't think that should change at this point, given how those games unfolded.
All right, fair enough. That's why we bring guys like you on the show to enlighten us. And, they ran out of bodies, they ran out of time, and here they are now.
Literally both in that final game, yes.
But, obviously the big storyline, though, was Micah Parsons. And I look at it very similar to a Reggie White type of acquisition that's kind of created a lot of excitement. You see the pass rush, and you kind of see like the other players. You tell me, I feel like the other players gravitate towards his energy, and he's just been a wonderful addition.
There's no way to underplay the Micah Parsons addition. This was a defense that last year was top 10 by basically any advanced metric you would look at, but there was clearly a line of demarcation between that unit and the truly top units in the league. And one of, if not the biggest reason for that, was the pass rush. It was a group collectively that, it wasn't like the worst in the league, but we're talking about decidedly middle of the pack in terms of consistent pressure being generated. Then you bring in Micah Parsons and all of those pieces slot into place. Rashawn Gary, who had been a very good edge defender during his career, now becomes effectively the number 2 for the first time since, I guess, maybe like his second season in the league. He, going into week 4, was the league leader in sacks. He's still high on the list. And it's not even just when Micah Parsons is on the field. Like 2 of his 4.5 sacks so far happened without Parsons actually there. So his play, not even just when Parsons is there, has improved. And you certainly see what it's done to that defensive front. They are able to pretty much generate pressure from any version of their 4-man front. And, they still blitz at times. They'll still do the simulated pressures that they did at the end of last season to overcome some of those pressure issues that they were having. But for the most part, they're sending 4, and it has worked in no small part to what Micah Parsons has provided on a down-to-down basis.
Yeah, it's been exciting to watch, and I do think they are legitimate Super Bowl contenders. I haven't wavered. I'm not moving off that, but I think Micah Parsons goes a long ways. And how's the back holding up, by the way? I haven't heard too much of it being an issue. Is it good to go, or is he taking injections still? What's the status there?
I actually don't think that he's taking an injection. I know that there was a report going into week one that he might have to. I don't believe that actually transpired.
Oh, interesting.
The back injury is not like fake in the sense that it was like a manufactured thing to keep him off the field when he was still in Dallas. Maybe something that was played up a little more while he was there. But, he's shown up on the injury report at several times with that back injury. He's also come off the injury report with it too. So I would say it's something that's worth monitoring, but it remains sort of like a not a front line issue for them unless something gets aggravated. And to date, it hasn't happened.
All right, very good. We're talking to Jason B. Hirschhorn here, the Leap over on Substack. Does a great job covering Lambeau and the Green Bay Packers. And I know you just did a piece over there on the most important non-quarterbacks, reevaluating this Packers roster. So give us a quick rundown. Who are some of the cornerstone players for the listening audience at home that we should know about?
For context in that piece, it was looking at something that myself and Peter Bukowski, my co-founder at The Leap, had done in the offseason. This was before the Micah Parsons trade. Obviously, Micah Parsons would have appeared on that list of
Sure.
most important non-quarterbacks had we done it with knowledge he was going to be there. But the point of the exercise was to figure out where sort of the pivot points on that roster were. They're like, this part of the roster is great, but if this player were to become unavailable for whatever the reason, that the roster would really hurt. And for the most part, it came down to those frontline defensive players and Zach Tom, the right tackle. Now, Zach Tom has in fact missed most of the season today. He played week one, got hurt near the end, didn't play week two, tried to play week three, lasted literally one snap before he had to go back out again, and didn't play in week four. And you can see what has happened with that offense in his absence. Now, it is still one of the best offenses in the league, but the way that it functions is significantly different. Weeks 1 and 2, when they were in one case playing with him virtually the entire game, or in week 2, when they weren't super concerned about the pass rush, this is an offense that was literally more vertical than any other unit in the league. Jordan Love had an average depth of target that exceeded every other quarterback with like whatever the minimum amount of attempts was. And then weeks 3 and weeks 4, when Zach Tom is effectively not there, and they're playing, in the case of the Cleveland Browns, one of the most talented defensive fronts with Myles Garrett there, the offense shifts gears. It was still able to put up a lot of good yards, but it was not going vertically. It was a lot of short passes, a lot of stuff done in the screen game. The average depth of target just plummeted. They had to work around that absence. So, if Zach Tom comes back after the bye, I don't think that's going to be a huge issue for them, as long as he can stay on the field from that point, because he has this like oblique tear. You don't really know how those things are going to hold up. But if they were to miss him for an extended period of time beyond what they've currently lost, I do think you're going to see more issues with that passing game, because even though it's clearly a unit that can put up huge points, I mean, we just saw it this past week against the Dallas Cowboys, you want to be able to attack vertically, and they just haven't been able to with him not there, at least not against some of the better pass rushes in the league. Going further down, like Rashawn Gary was on that list. I would say that he's probably not going to be quite as high anymore for the reasons we already stated. Just Micah Parsons being there, it just sort of socializes the burden on that defensive front. Like, you just don't have to do as much when you're Rashawn Gary when you have Micah Parsons there. The other defender that we had on the list, or I had on the list, Edgerrin Cooper, their second-year linebacker, I do think he remains extremely valuable. Now, he's actually coming off maybe his worst game, not just of the season, but like of his career. But over the course of not just this season and last, he has been arguably their best overall defender. It's been him or Xavier McKinney, the other defensive player that's worth mentioning here, that has really stabilized the unit. Like, Edgerrin Cooper can be a meaningful part of their pass rush. They've used him in some of those blitz packages, some of those simulated pressures. They also, a lot of times, leave him one-on-one in coverage, especially when they're blitzing with other players. He does both those things extremely well, which there's not a long list of linebackers for which you can say that about, right? Like, we saw it like last night, as we're speaking now, Fred Warner go and cover a wide receiver on the boundary. That's not something that you really see from off-ball linebackers very often. Edgerrin Cooper is one of the few players for which that can also be true. And they haven't used him in that exact capacity yet, but it's something that they could experiment with if they needed to. So again, it's really about those more versatile pieces on the defense. And again, their best offensive lineman is Zach Tom.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Edgerrin Cooper. I always have been, and I'm not going to make too much over one game, but Man, they got playmakers in every level up front. Gary and Parsons and Cooper in the second level, and you mentioned McKinney on the back end. What do you have? 8 interceptions last year coming over from Big Blue. So a lot of weaponry here for the Green Bay Packers. Jason, this has been phenomenal insight here. One quick question about the wide receivers. You mentioned they can still score points, and I think it's Jaden Reed and Christian Watson who are currently out.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Could you see Green Bay making a deal? I see a couple rumors out there about them possibly trading for a wide receiver. Or are they going to be good with what they got, you think?
Well, Christian Watson could return as soon as their next game. They've already, played 4 games. He's on the PUP list. He's eligible to come off, and now they're on their bye. So it's additional time to rest. At least according to the coaching staff, Watson had been ahead of schedule anyway. There was some discussion, not a lot, but some discussion. They might even be able to come off the PUP before week 1. Obviously, that didn't happen. But given that was the discussion at that time, and given that there hasn't been, at least to the best of our knowledge, any setback in the time since, I think he's going to come back either for week 6 or I think a little more likely week 7. Now you've added the biggest, maybe the fastest receiver in that group back into the fold. And I think that does, again, assuming that some of those other pieces fall in place as we discussed with the offensive line, I think that would open things up for them. And then you have other things too, like Matthew Golden, you've started to see really come on. Like this past game, he on the Packers' first drive has that 45 or 46-yard reception, like right out of the gate. So you're seeing growth there. You're expecting Watson back soon. Romeo Doubs has been extremely consistent this season. Dontavian Wicks, who had drop issues a year ago, has not dropped a pass and has also made some very key receptions for them as well. So you look at all those receivers, and we haven't even talked about the tight ends. I mean, Tucker Kraft has developed into one of the better tight ends in the league. I don't think there's really an issue, like a manpower issue there. It's just getting those guys together and getting the passing game to a point where you feel comfortable calling some of those deeper developing plays. I mean, a year ago, maybe their most commonly called shot concept was dagger. Very common concept in the league. You see it. Literally every team runs it. They ran that more than any other major concept in that playbook. This year, they've run it, at least by my charting, 3 times through 4 weeks. Very strange. And I think the offensive line is the story behind that, right? Like if you don't feel like you're going to get the protection to get that play to work, it doesn't make sense to call it. I think if they're able to, again, get the health along the offensive line in a position where they trust the protection and, they get Watson back in the not too distant future, I think you're going to see a lot of those things come together. So I don't think it's very likely that they would trade for a receiver. It's not entirely impossible if after Watson returns and some of these other pieces, fall into place, maybe they look to move one of the receivers that they have, if there's something out there that makes sense for them. So an acquisition at that position doesn't seem terribly likely to me, but injuries can sometimes change the narrative here, right? Like,
Sure.
Jaden Reed was a big part of this. He's expected to miss, all of October and maybe a good chunk of November as he recovers from a collarbone break. So we'll have to see how this plays out. If they have more injuries, maybe that changes. Right now, I don't think that's an area of concern for them.
Yeah, and it's amazing. You rattle off all these receivers, and they've all got to be like 25 or younger. It's just like an incredible.
Literally all of them are 26 or under, and I think most of them are under the age of 24 as we're speaking right now. So it is a very young unit, but it's also a unit that's been tested, right? Like other than Matthew Golden, Savion Williams, these are guys who have played multiple seasons. I mean, Jaden Reed has been their leading receiver each of the past 2 years, and he's only a third-year player now. So it's both a young group and an experienced group at the same time. It's just a very strange thing in the NFL.
Yeah, an interesting dynamic. All right, last one for you, Jason. Before we let you go, give us your gauge of the temperature in the pecking order. The NFC seems like really loaded this year. You got the Eagles, the Bucks. We saw the 49ers aren't going away. They did well against the Detroit Lions, but where does the Green Bay Packers fall in the power rankings, in your opinion?
Whatever you view as that first tier of NFC teams, I think they belong in there because there's not really a lot of them. Like, the Rams have a lot of talent, but they also have now whatever it is, like 2 losses, and there's been some close games too. The Detroit Lions are up there. The Packers have already beaten the Detroit Lions. Now the Eagles are there. They're currently undefeated, but the Packers get a chance at them in the not too distant future. They play them, I think it's like November or late October, and they get that game at home. So that lines up, at least based on what we know right now, fairly well for them. They're just of the top teams, I don't think if you're Green Bay, you have to like truly fear any of them. You know that you can beat them. Now they can beat you too. It's not a guarantee either way, but I think whatever that upper crust of the NFC is, the Packers are a part of that, at least as they're constituted right now.
Yeah, I think so. Awesome stuff, Jason. Tell the listening audience at home what you got cooking over on the Leap, where they can find all your great work.
Well, you should go to the Leap directly. The website is theleap.football. We got that really cool like .football domain
I like
name.
that.
You
Yeah.
can find me on social media at by_JBH, or in some places by JBH without that underscore. So check us out there. You can check out my partner, Peter Bukowski. He and I share the responsibilities at the Leap. We obviously cover the Green Bay Packers, but we cover the NFL nationally as well. And in the offseason, we dive as deep as anybody on the draft. So check us out. I don't think you'll be disappointed.
Love it. Doing great job, man. And we'll circle back to you come draft season. We'd love to talk some draft with you.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on, Rick.
Yeah, absolutely. Enjoy the rest of your bye week and all the football action. And we'll be buckled up and geared up for a long Green Bay Packers run this season. I have a feeling.
I think you might be right on that. Again, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. You got it. There goes Jason B. Hirschhorn.